In this video, we will learn about a massive volcanic complex that extends from Yellowstone to the north and south. These volcanoes are older than the Yellowstone caldera, and their eroded remnants form the spectacular Absaroka Mountains. Within these gorgeous mountains, we will search for clues to the nature of the volcanoes that formed various landscapes. We'll learn about the processes that form beautiful and interesting rock. Wonderful features will be investigated. Evidence of massive volcanic forces will be explored, and we'll see amazing examples of catastrophic events. We'll learn about many great forests that were engulfed by volcanic deposits and petrified. We'll discover a surprising reason grizzly bears thrive in these mountains and the importance of the region to wildlife such as these bighorn sheep. Hello, I'm Myron Cook. Yellowstone. What a beautiful and fascinating place to visit and learn about. I know that most of us, well, actually probably all of us, are familiar with the great hot spot that lies underneath Yellowstone and these giant eruptions that occurred as a result, the supervolcano. But I'm going to let you in on a secret. In my opinion, the best places to see ancient volcanic features aren't even in Yellowstone, although they're right adjacent to it. And surprisingly, many people drive through these areas unaware. So it's my hope that this video will inspire you to visit some of these areas on your next trip to Yellowstone. We'll start this adventure along Highway 14 between Cody, Wyoming and Yellowstone National Park. I've finally made it to the first volcanic feature that I want to show you. I know many of you know how this wall was created that stretches off into the distance. It's quite striking, isn't it?
Boy, what a struggle to get to here. I had to push through some heavy brush there along the river, cross the river. I was in water up over my knee here, and it was pretty swift, a bit dicey. And I'm in a bit of a hurry. It looks like rain's moving in on me. But I've done all this to come to this magnificent volcanic wall. It's a volcanic dike where the hot magma forced its way up, fracturing the earth, bursting to the surface. It's really spectacular, and we have this wall preserved here. And I wanted to come here and see this and put my hand on it. I could see it from the highway, but so it's cool. It's really neat. Beautiful, beautiful. Now here comes the fun. Imagine being a geologist back in the day and you first come across these dikes like this. You know what the first thing you want to do is? Yeah, you want to trace it out. Not only that, you want to look for other dikes like this one. And you just keep tracing them out and mapping them on a map. And if you're fortunate, it could reveal a marvelous pattern. And this very dike, and many in this area, help us understand something rather spectacular, actually quite spectacular.
We've been focused on the dike extending up into the mountains to the north, but it turns out it's also very interesting to look to the south across the Shoshone River. The side of the dike is here, and the Shoshone River is here in the distance. And if you look carefully, you can see the dike in the mountainside. Isn't this impressive? Not only do we see the main dike, we see other dikes branching off of it. Here on the steep mountainside, the dike doesn't form a wall, and it cuts way up nearly to the top of the mountain. It looks like it ends right here. I'm going to get over there and put my hand on it. It's a nice, fresh surface.
Unfortunately, I've got to cross this river again, and this time I'm going to take the time and put a little camera here on my tripod, my walking staff, so you can see my adventure. It's a bit dicey. The water's pretty shallow for about half of it, but as you get across to the other bank there, it gets kind of deep and pretty swift. Here we go. I've done these a few times in my life, crossed these rivers. The rocks are quite slippery. I don't have special shoes on for this. I could get real wet and I could definitely ruin some equipment, but no risk for me. Right up to my hip pocket. Woo-wee. I'm getting too old for this. Still deep. I had a better route crossing the first time. Hey, guess what? I made it. Whew. Oh boy. Well, I made it. Gosh, I'm wet all the way to my pocket here. Bit much for me. I don't know if I'll do that too many more times. It gets a little harder for your balance as you get older. But it'd be a bit entertaining to take a swim. If it weren't for my equipment, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I hope you enjoyed that. Amazing to see this dike in cross section. It's been cut to make the roadway for a little bit up here, and then it's a naturally steep mountainside. And you see this great cross section of this dike, and it's the very same dike we saw across the way where it's naturally eroding into a wall. This is just as fun as it gets.
Following the dike further, we see that it points deep into the mountains. There are other spectacular dikes that also point deep into the mountains. In fact, there seems to be dikes everywhere. The more you look, the more you see. If we mark 2 of the dikes we visited on Google Earth, we don't see a pattern. The first one is about 4 miles long, and the second one is about 5 miles long. One has to wonder if they're related to each other. Geologists mapped this region from the mid-1960s through the mid-90s, and of course they mapped the significant dikes shown here with red lines. Wow, that's a lot of them. This map is about 6 miles wide. But as often is the case, we need to see a larger area to reveal the full picture. I digitized the dikes from the geology maps and put them onto Google Earth. It's rather obvious that these dikes point to the center of a massive volcano, isn't it? It's referred to as the Sunlight Volcano and last erupted about 48 million years ago during the Eocene period. Based on observations, we know it was a massive stratovolcano, also known as a composite volcano. Mount Fuji of Japan and Mount Kilimanjaro of Tanzania are 2 great examples of stratovolcanoes. Of course, we want to see what the core of this volcano looks like today after some 48 million years of erosion. This will be new to me. I've never been there before, and I wonder what I will see as I drive into the very core of the volcano. As I get closer, these 2 mountains catch my eye. Zooming in, the features reveal themselves. The forces involved to shatter these 2 mountains, creating the network of dikes, captures my imagination. Higher and higher we go. What do you think of this mountain of loose rock? Wow, there's more than one mountain of loose rock. Spectacular and rugged country, isn't it? There's a lot to contemplate when looking at this scene.
What an amazing drive coming up here. Just spectacular. I love it. And I came up as far as I could on this Jeep road, which has been destroyed by recent mass movement, and then another big hike up to here, and I could still keep going, but I'm running out of time because there are at least 2 other places I want to visit by the end of the day. But I'm here in the belly of the beast. It's like you can feel the energy of this ancient volcano. You see the great fracturing of the rock with the dikes that have injected up into it through entire mountainsides. It's almost overwhelming to think about the power involved and the forces that this volcano had. And then you see evidence of lots of erosion of all these talus slopes. And if you look carefully, you'll see ridges on them and things that looks like the rock is flowing, like a glacier. What's that all about? And then I have a question for you. How much of this volcano do you think has eroded over the past 45 million years or so? Is it a fourth of it? Maybe a little less? Maybe more? Could it be 50%? Man, that's a lot of erosion to think that at one time maybe this mountain was much, much taller. And how would you go about determining how much of this mountain eroded? We're going to go develop a method, and I want you to think about methods that you would use to determine how much erosion and how big this volcano was at one time. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
The amount of rock in these huge piles of talus is rather incomprehensible. If you look carefully, you can see layered deposits such as lava flows built up on the side of the volcano. The slope or the dip of these layers is over 40 degrees. Cresting over the mountain, we see the upper drainage of the Shoshone River. All of this country is deep within the core of the volcano. Looking back, we see the path that I drove in the Jeep up this great valley. And here are the two mountains that are filled with a vast network of dykes.
Well, I'm about 2.5 miles to the southeast of where we were, with another great view of this great volcano. And boy, it was quite a Jeep trip. I wouldn't have known how to get here. It's a bit tricky, but fortunately my brother is with me to show me the way. So he's along with me on this trip, and I'm really grateful he's with me because we got a flat tire down the road a ways back there, and it's pretty good work, you know, moving around these big tires. So I'll say hi to Elgin here, and I'm grateful for his help.
We see mountains of talus like we saw at the other location. If you look closely, you can see me. I'm a bit camouflaged, though. The massive amount of rock we see is a testament to how quickly erosion can tear a mountain down. Again, we see evidence of great forces involved. I'm sure you're curious about the patterns that you see in these huge piles of rock. I'll do a separate video on that in the future.
What an amazing place. It's really very inspiring to me. See this great wall here. There's some evidence of mineralization here. I'm close to the very heart of this great volcano, and to think about the great eruptions that occurred. And then the steady erosion, the power of erosion, how it's just tearing this mountain down. I mean, very quickly. But turning back to, some 45 million years ago, to think about the impact it had on the Great Plains surrounding this volcano, especially off to the east, where you had subtropical climate, you had many early mammals running around enjoying their lives, early horses, hippos, the early predators, and many other animals living out there in peace until this guy went off. And then, well, you can imagine, can't you? But what a wonderful place. I recommend getting up here if you have a really good four-wheel drive. It has to have a low gear range and a Jeep or smaller, and you can make your way up in here. Of course, there's the option of hiking. It'd be a pretty good hike to get up into this country, but it's worth it. It's worth it.
The Absaroka Mountains are a magical place to be, especially in the spring. It is so peaceful and inviting. But I must say, I enjoy them during all the seasons. Winter is harsh, yet beautiful. It was during the harsh winter in this very area where Charles Belden captured this image on the historic Pitchfork Ranch. He became famous for capturing images of ranch life on the Pitchfork in the early 1900s. I love his photos, and I think black and white photos often capture the scene better than color. I took this photo years ago in these mountains, which I feel captures the mood of volcanic terrain well. As I drive up the mountain on this late summer day, I reflect on the beauty of eroded volcanoes and the astounding geology I have encountered here. The top of the mountain here has a rather gentle terrain, far different from what we've seen earlier. I haven't hiked over to this outcrop before, but it sure looks intriguing.
Really interesting deposit, isn't it? What do we see about this? What do we note? Well, first of all, we've got to talk about the color. It's very light colored, unusually light colored. It ranges from very fine grained when I look at it carefully, and I'll show you some closer photos, but very fine grained. And we get also some pebble size class in here. Even there's some pretty good pebbles, 4 or 5 times the size of marbles in here, and as I look elsewhere they can even get bigger. I also see really faint bedding in here, fine lamina that are dipping within here in various directions. And we think about the system that we're in, a volcanic system, and you start putting it together. You think, well, what's light colored? Volcanic ash. Could it be that this has a lot of volcanic ash in it? Well, in fact, yes, it has a lot of ash within it. And one telltale sign for me, just to come up here and put my hand on it, man, I feel like if I were to rub my hand on here very hard, it would just grate and make my hand bleed. Just scrape it all up. That's all that volcanic glass that's within here.
Under the microscope, we see the lithified ash, which is referred to as tuff. I've included a needle in the image for scale. These are small particles of minerals, rocks, and volcanic glass, although the glass I think is hard to see. Most of the outcrop is a tuff dominated by angular rock and mineral fragments.
But it isn't ash that has just fallen to the ground and is sitting there currently. It's actually been reworked, which is very common. So the ash fell to the ground, and the local rivers and streams picked it up, transported it, and redeposited into river deposits, fluvial deposits, which include the coarser grain material up to the very fine, and we see the cross bedding within it. So it's a fascinating unit sitting right here on top of the mountain.
I'm sure glad I walked over to this outcrop because right next to it I found something pretty special. A double window with some amazing geology surrounding it. I think I could spend easily a half hour studying the geology of this one small area. We'll be learning about these types of deposits soon. Earlier this spring, I did a flight to investigate some areas of the Absaroka Mountains, and I found something that really got my attention. And after a long Jeep ride, I still have a good ways to go to investigate what I'd found. My goal is to get way out here on this point. I'm a bit hard to see. I'm walking along the top of a lava flow that looks like basalt. But it's lava that is quite rare and is called a tracheandesite. In fact, this sequence is named the Trout Peak tracheandesite. Tracheandesite is dominated by sodium-rich plagioclase and alkali feldspar. But this lava flow isn't why I came out here. What I'm here for lies below the lava, and it is mind-blowing. Let's let the mountain speak for itself as it's revealed. Be patient. What do you think the darker shapes are? Are these catching your eye? Here are some of them. Make sure and notice the mature pine trees. It helps you understand just how big these blocks are. The more you look, the more you see. Here's a big guy.
Wow, what an amazing mountain. Wasn't it fun to just see the geology reveal itself just as you saw more and more and you started to understand what was going on, at least to some level? I mean, I had that process of discovery when I saw it. It took me a while to start to put it all together, and it just got more exciting by the minute. And I hope you enjoyed thinking about, well, how did this happen? What's going on here? Why are these giant blocks in the mountainside? Now, that's fun to think about, isn't it? And I'm sure many of you have figured it out, at least to some level. And, well, now I have the whiteboard to help us out with this. Let's go to the first over here. We have the Great Volcano. I've even put a few little fancy red lines here to show some heat coming out of the top. And I have this blue line here that represents a fault, a breakaway, where the side of the mountain just broke free and came out. Kind of like St. Helens, maybe something similar, what Mount St. Helens did. And a giant debris flow, or lahar. When we have volcanic debris flows, they're referred to as lahars. They can be very muddy, they can have small rocks, big rocks, and in this case, man, some massive, massive pieces entrained within it. So if we look down upon this lahar, this flow, it flows out and widens out at the toe of it, like I've shown here. If we could just use our imagination here and cut a deep trench right across this big lahar, this is a giant lahar, cut it right through here, deep, deep through the whole thing and look at it sideways, well, this is what this is supposed to represent. So we have a cross-sectional view, complete with my little tree here. In actuality, if I were to draw this to scale, this tree would be way, way smaller, wouldn't it? Because these blocks are just huge, huge relative to this tree. So at any rate, we have this massive lahar. And within it, these giant blocks, and they're suspended in matrix. The matrix is all the material between the blocks, and it was mud, and it had a high density. In fact, the density of the mud was very similar to the density of these giant blocks, and that's why they could kind of float in it and be transported without breaking all up and not contacting each other like you see with rocks and rivers and stuff. Because the rocks in a river, they're in a low density fluid, and man, they're banging around on each other. And when they settle down, they're touching each other, unlike what we see here. You know, I could hire a young person to help me out that really knows computers and the right software to create a nice animated 3D view of a huge lahar coming off a volcano. But personally, I like to use what's right here, our imagination. So I want you to just imagine for a minute, just standing off to the side and seeing this enormous flow of debris coming down off the volcano way out into the flats and piling up like this. It must have been astounding.
So there you have it, gigantic pieces of the Sunlight volcano that broke free, were enveloped in mud, and transported many miles. After this great landslide, great lava flows and other volcanic deposits exceeding 2,000 feet were deposited over the top of it. We're not sure just how far it traveled, but we do know that the center of the Sunlight volcano is some 35 miles away. I think it likely traveled 20 to 30 miles. Absolutely astounding. There are other examples of these megalahars. Normally, this one would seem very impressive, but not compared to the one we just explored. But there is another truly spectacular one that I got a single photo of from an airplane. Notice the mature trees for scale. With the principles we've learned, we can have some fun analyzing this amazing mountain. How would you draw the boundaries of this lahar? What do you think the sequence of events was to create this mountain? Do you see two distinctive parts to this lahar? Let's start by mapping the top of the lahar. This is where I think it is. It seems to me that there are two parts to this lahar, an upper part and lower. The lower is where all the giant blocks are, and the upper part seems to be more layered and has fewer blocks. The blue line is where I place the contact between these two parts. I think you could make the case to draw it somewhat differently than this, but this is my interpretation. On the right side of this flow, I think you see evidence that this filled a large canyon. To me, the base of the flow seems to be plunging down steeply. The green line is where I put the base, at least what you can see of it. I really like this mountainside exposure because you can see the original shape of much of the lahar, and it's dramatic. But I also really like this outcrop because you can clearly see what happened after the lahar was deposited. There were many thick lava flows of trachyandesite that filled in around it and over the top of it. If you focus your eyes on layering within the lava, it helps you see it more clearly. I've drawn in a few of the layers with blue lines. This helps us clearly see how the lava flowed right up to the massive lahar as it filled up around it. It's a pretty spectacular mountainside, isn't it?
As you'll recall, a while back I asked you to think about how you would estimate the height of this ancient volcano. How tall was it? And thereby figure out how much erosion has occurred in the last 45 million years or so. And these are really fun things to think about. It helps you imagine this whole scene that was present at the time. And I hope you've had fun thinking on this. And I'm going to give you a major clue. I think the key to this estimation is using modern analogs.
Mount St. Helens of Washington State is a well-known example of a stratovolcano, and the Mayan volcano of the Philippines is a great example of a stratovolcano. It has that classic shape we are all familiar with. The beautiful Mount Fuji of Japan also has a very classic shape. And then there's the mighty Kilimanjaro of Tanzania. There are over 700 stratovolcanoes in the world, and a very high percentage of them have that classic shape to them. This rather predictable shape can be used to our advantage in estimating the sizes of ancient stratovolcanoes. I think we can assume that the ancient ones also had similar shapes.
The assumption that we make that stratovolcanoes have similar shapes is a very powerful thing to use. It's a great tool to use into the past because now we can start to understand how big these volcanoes could be in the past. And I've got a cross-section here of Mount Fuji. And the dark line here is the ground that the volcano built up on. It's not sea level. It's the ground. And I have, of course, Mount Fuji. Now, the thickness of the volcanic pile, or sometimes I refer to it as the vertical relief of the overall volcano, is about 11,400 feet. And the radius of it, the distance from the center to the edge of the volcanic material deposited, is about 8 miles. So that's one member that we can put on this sketch. Let's sketch Kilimanjaro, which is much bigger. Let me try to do that here. Oh, I'm going to bring it about here and up like this, something like that. Well, Kilimanjaro, the vertical relief on that is about 15,800 feet, and the radius from the center out to the edge is about 20 miles. So we have 2 points for us to consider, 2 analogs, and now we can place the Sunlight volcano. So what we're trying to get at is the vertical relief of the ancient Sunlight volcano, and then we can have fun with how big it was when it was active and how much erosion has occurred. So the one thing we know is the approximate radius, or at least we can use a proxy to estimate that radius. And right now, we're using the dykes that we've seen. Now that, as we get more information, we might decide that that's a bit wrong, shall we say, that we need to adjust it. And I have a feeling it's going to get bigger. But for now, let's use those dykes. And the radius of those is about 12 miles. So if we do that and say the radius is about 12 miles and sketch something in, I'll make it in blue here. I'll go something like this. Just like something like that. It's in between Fuji and Kilimanjaro, closer to Mount Fuji. And if you do some math and think about it, you come up with a vertical relief of about 13,000 feet. And with that knowledge, we can think about erosion.
But first, I need to give you some important information. There are places where you can see the contact between the sedimentary rock formations and the volcanic material that was deposited upon it. All the material below the home on this ridge is sedimentary, not volcanic, and the darker colored mountains in the background are all volcanic. A Google Earth view gives us a better perspective. The prior photograph was taken right here in this area, and here we can clearly see the contact between the volcanic and the sedimentary. The elevation of the contact is variable, but on average is around 6,500 feet. An even higher view is quite informative because we clearly see how the Shoshone River has cut down through all the volcanic material to reveal the sedimentary rocks underneath. We also see the light color here, which is at the very core of the volcano. Finally, the full picture comes into view with the radial dykes pointing to the very core. Now comes the fun. I want you to create a picture in your mind of how high this volcano might have been above the current landscape. For reference, the peaks within the core are about 11,500 feet or so tall. Jakob Ruffner, an expert in GIS, reached out to me and offered to help. He created a scaled model of the volcano over this very terrain, and it expresses well the image I had painted in my mind. Thank you, Jakob. The spectacular mountains at the core we visited seem so small underneath this once great volcano. Astounding. If we take the elevation of the ground level that the volcano built upon of 6,500 feet and add the vertical relief of 13,000 feet, we get an elevation of 19,500 feet for the peak. To help us understand the size of this mountain, we can take the Gateway Arch of St. Louis and place it to scale in the model. Can you see it? It's very small. When you do the calculations, you find that about 2/3 of the volcano has been eroded. Yes, 2/3. And soon we'll make some observations that suggest it's even more than that. Also, I want to mention that at the time this volcano was active, the base of it wasn't too far above sea level, But about 10 to 15 million years ago, a vast region along the Rocky Mountains was uplifted, bringing the base up to about 6,500 feet.
This particular video has been quite a project for me. I started filming in the spring and it's continued right into September. And the more I explore, the more I find that I want to share with you. I've learned so much. Recently, I realized that I've just got too much material for one video, so I've decided to break it into two parts. Now, in the second video, we're going to see and learn some amazing things, like about the many fossil forests, or about the other volcanoes and their role in building the Absaroka Mountains. We'll find out that stratovolcanoes shouldn't even be here in Wyoming. What's that all about? In fact, geologists are still debating as to exactly why they're here. And we'll have fun learning about what happened when the great Yellowstone hotspot met these Absaroka volcanoes. Oh, and we will not forget the grizzly bears. I hope you'll join me in the next video. Thank you for watching. And would you consider subscribing? Thank you.